Hi there. Good afternoon, good morning. We're just going to wait for folks to trickle in. Give us just about a minute or so. We'll get started. Okay. Oops. It's not a linear path, so folks are kind of trickling in off and on, but we've got a great crowd. So I'm going to get started. My name is, so good afternoon or good morning, depending on what part of the country you're in or even the world. I know we've had folks from all over the world tune into these before. My name is Ted Wells, and I'm a Vice President, STEM Connector. Before we begin today, I just want to acknowledge an all too familiar feeling of anxiety that has come over the world today. This time, of course, the cause of is not the pandemic, but the looming specter of war, as Russia has embarked on a hostile invasion of Ukraine. So we are thinking about our friends and colleagues affected by these events, and I'm sure those of you joining today are. And so we can only hope that a peaceful resolution to this conflict is expeditious. Thank you. So again, thank you for joining us today. For those of you for whom STEM Connector is new, we are a national organization supporting industry engagement in STEM education and outreach. We just celebrated 10 years of work in this space, and our key areas of focus are advancing stakeholder understanding and leveraging evidence-based approaches to broadening and deepening STEM education across age and stage by engaging employers, building awareness of the work that our members who are from industry, higher education, and the nonprofit sector are doing in this space, and connecting these stakeholders to opportunities that will enable them to realize organizational objectives that advance equity in STEM education and drive innovation. The last 2 years have seen unprecedented challenges to the entire education system, and to say that the current system is in a fragile state would be generous. We are seeing teachers leave the workforce at unprecedented rates, while persistent challenges faced by systems are worsening. Help is needed to support the education system, but that help is most valuable when it fits into a larger educational ecosystem. And that's what we're going to explore today. It is clear today's discussion is relevant to the educational landscape, and I'm thrilled that you have taken the time to join us. Today, we're going to focus on a central challenge that the STEM education movement has faced since its inception, as its endeavor to engage employers to contribute in meaningful and sustainable ways to outcomes in partnership with stakeholders. On the one hand, we have ample evidence that a laundry list of activities like engaging students early, sparking interest through interactive and engaging activities, creating after-school opportunities for STEM reinforcement, supporting work-based learning opportunities, nurturing teachers whose practice is grounded in inquiry-based pedagogy, adopting and employing an equity-based approach to creating access to these resources, just to name a few. On the other hand, these are extremely challenging tasks, each single one of the ones that I just rattled off, and tens of thousands, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of individuals are dedicated to improving outcomes in these areas. So today's discussion aims not to add more talk, but to surface some insights from our esteemed panel of experts on this topic of industry engagement. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you to our panel, and I will introduce them, and then they will then introduce themselves. So we have first Jason Flom as ASCD faculty, and focusing on ASCD as a STEM Connector member. You'll learn a little bit about ASCD and the work that they do from Jason. Focuses on STEM, DE&I, science standards. Miles Wilson, who is president and CEO of Education Works, an amazing organization based in Philadelphia that we've partnered with for a number of years. Dr. Stephanie Fitzsimmons, who's a manager of corporate citizenship and communities programs and strategy at Northrop Grumman Corporation, a longtime partner of STEM Connector. And also Dr. Gabriela Gonzalez, who's Director of STEM Education Initiatives and Operations Manager at the Intel Foundation. And Gabriela has been a frequent contributor to these discussions. So Jason, I'll turn it to you to sort of introduce yourself, and then everybody can introduce yourselves, and then we'll start with some questions. Does that make sense?
Sounds great. Hi, my name is Jason Flum. I am faculty member with ASCD. ASCD is an international education association. We have members all around the world. Latest number I heard today was around 70,000 educators, thanks to one of our clever panelists. And we work with schools and educators to lead towards positive student outcomes with a strong focus on equity and engagement.
Awesome. And I think Miles is next.
Miles Wilson. Education Works is a mission-driven organization located in Philadelphia. We are the largest provider of out-of-school time services in the city of Philadelphia, but also with programming in Camden, New Jersey, right over the bridge. We serve from kindergarten to age 12. We also have a workforce development strategy called Power Corps PHL. It's AmeriCorps funded, but it focuses on green jobs. 70% of those individuals, 18 to 30, that take advantage of our program are coming out of incarceration. It is our duty, our responsibility to connect those individuals to real career opportunities and entrepreneurial pursuits as well.
Awesome, thank you. And I believe Stephanie.
Hey everybody, I'm Stephanie Fitzsimmons and I'm from Northrop Grumman. In my current role, I work strategy programs and communities within the corporate citizenship team, and STEM education is our largest of our focus areas, helping us to support building strong and sustainable communities. Beyond my work, my PhD focused on career and workforce education with a focus on comparisons between male and females in undergraduate computer science, and I'm excited to be part of the panel.
Awesome. Gabriella.
Hello, everyone. Gabby Gonzalez. I am Director of, as Ted mentioned, STEM education initiatives at Intel, and also Operations Manager for the Intel Foundation. And I have a kindred spirit in Stephanie, as we were both PhD candidates and completed our thesis in or about something related to STEM education. And I also sit on the national, outside of or beyond work, as Stephanie mentioned, I sit as the National Science Foundation STEM Education Panel Chair currently, and other boards that are also STEM education related. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I would say in our work at STEM Connector over the last 10 years, Northrop Grumman and Intel have been very much involved, and there are a few companies out there that have been in this space as long as both of them have, but not many. It's a short list, and really with a strong focus on equity-based approaches to supporting STEM education, and also trying to engage their employees. So thank you all very much for joining. Also, just a couple little housekeeping. I noticed that my colleague Amy Etten is amazing at getting the chat discussion going. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. And also, we have a Q&A feature as well, but you're also welcome to ask questions in there, and we will do our best to answer them. If I can sort of weave them into the conversation, that's great too. Way this is going to work is I'm going to ask each speaker a question that kind of surfaced in our prep call, and then we have a few questions that we're going to put out to all of them. But please shoot a question out there, because you might have a better question than the ones that I've put together, or one that just kind of builds on the conversation a little more effectively. So great. I'm going to get started. Jason, ASCD is a relatively new STEM Connector member, but has a long track record of supporting systemic change in districts across the country. Actually, as I was planning this back a couple months ago, ASCD was the organization whose literature surfaced about systemic change in education. Can you provide an overview, though, of sort of what it's a word that, you know, means a lot of different things to people, and so could you talk about what it means in this context of STEM in both the national level and with regards to your institution as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay, Ted. I've got some slides that I think will help in this regard. Yeah, so at ASCD, we do work as in terms of our faculty and our professional learning services to work with schools, teachers, districts, and school leaders all over the United States and all over the world through our affiliate members in order to help empower local and systemic change, which we know there's no turning a battleship on a dime when it comes to education or some of these big, long these institutions that have been around for a long time, but that is work that we engage in and we engage in over time, which is how we have to do it, you know, coming up with a shared vision of where we're going and then working to enact that. So in terms of looking at system change towards equitable STEM pedagogy, we know that this is exceptionally difficult, and this thread of applying equity frameworks to our STEM frameworks is an emerging field that's just kind of coming into its own at this time. And it's tricky, but it's doable, especially when we think about where can we affect change at different scales and with different people. So when we think about complex problems, we typically define complex problems through the lens of there's no single root cause, there's no single owner. If we had a woman president, educational inequity wouldn't be a problem. Well, that's probably not the case. We'd like to try, might as well give it a shot. But the situation evolves, and that's certainly true in educational inequities. And there's entrenched behaviors and interests that kind of keep things from changing. You know, so we know that we could solve a lot of educational inequities if we were able to solve for poverty. That doesn't look like it's happening because there's a lot of people who benefit and are entrenched and they have interest in maintaining the status quo. So we know that these are complex problems. So when we think about educational inequity, we wonder, does it meet this criteria? Yes, there's not a single root cause, there's no single owner, the situation continues to evolve, and there are entrenched behaviors and interests that keep us from being able to make change. So we know that when it comes to educational inequities, we have a complex problem, and that's certainly true when it comes to STEM. The unique thing that we have going with STEM and STEAM, high quality programs, either formal or informal, in school or out of school, do show to have a positive impact on some of the inequities that we're experiencing in education, and that directly impact students, especially our Black, Indigenous, and students of color, as well as other marginalized students, including the difference between male and female in STEM programming. So when we think about solving, disrupting, tackling complex problems, we kind of look at it through the lens of five methods that continue to evolve over time, building a shared understanding. And when we talk about that, that's about coming up with what is the main problem that we're working on. When you're looking at educational inequities from one place with one disparate stakeholder group, it looks different than another stakeholder group. And so coming together to figure out what is the actual problem we're solving. Everyone who works in these industries knows that if you jump to problem solving before you've defined the problem, you've made one step too far. So building a shared understanding of what it is we're doing, securing commitments from disparate groups. We know that we need to have a number of different players, and we need to have inclusivity in terms of the communities that we're working in or that we want to impact. But doesn't mean we need to have inclusivity of all players, because some players have entrenched interests that are not interested in seeing these inequities change. So it's about making sure that who's at the table are the people most impacted by oppression, and they're most impacted by oppression. The change in dynamics means, what are we going to do different? How are we going to shift and change a pattern that we're seeing? And this could be in terms of how we are moving from top-down policies and practices to grassroots up. So if we know that if we come in white, cisgender male, if I create the STEM program and the assessment for that STEM program, and then I expect it to be implemented, it's going to have baked in biases, it's going to have baked in politics, it's going to have baked in programming. So my goal as an educator is really, how do I empower, how do I center the community so that the community is able to be at the center of that work, and it's not a reflection of who I am, but it's a reflection of the community. It's starting to move towards what they call generative justice. And moving towards that work is more of a grassroots up work than a top down. So whenever we're trying to pair industry with practice, we need to be mindful of, saying, this is the silver bullet to, these are some tools and strategies, let's work together to make them happen. Enabling coordination isn't just about the meta group getting together and talking. Enabling coordination is how do we enable coordination between all the players who are impacted either by the oppression that we're trying to address, the inequities we're trying to address, or where we're trying to go. So it's even about how do we get educators who are doing STEM programming, how do we enable them to coordinate so that they're able to have professional learning communities together? Because sometimes it's the informal coordination between players, students even, that can impact and grow the greatest. And then augment learning. We have to be in a continual cycle of feedback loops and learning, which also could translate all the way down into scale of how do we create assessment opportunities for students where they feel that they have a voice. So when we're thinking about change, we have to acknowledge that each student, teacher, school, community is unique. Therefore, it necessitates equitable solutions. Now, at this point, it's important to make sure that we're on the same page with equity. And I use a really simple definition for equity. Equality, everyone has shoes. Equity, all the shoes fit. And the deeper level of that fitness is that it fits the foot and the situation. Birkenstocks might fit great around the house, but they're not going to be great on the soccer field. So it's not just about having a pair of shoes that fit, it has to fit the situation. And then a deeper look at equity, especially when it comes to STEM, is traditionally we think about equity in terms of access and achievement, but it's particularly important in STEM and really all forms of equity that we're looking at power and identity as well. Students need to not only have access to STEM and have opportunities to solve complex problems through STEM, they also need to have opportunities to see that the things that they're doing have the power to make change and that they have power. They also need to see identity, that they themselves have a maker identity. They feel that this is a place where they belong. And that's exceptionally important. So when we go back to this model of it necessitates equitable solutions, we have to look at it through the four lenses of access, achievement, power, and identity. So as we start to think about moving through towards STEM pedagogy, there's some questions that we might ask as we're thinking about networking, partnerships, and stakeholders. So who are the district, school, community leaders, stakeholders who hold the keys, who can open the doors to these opportunities? And we're thinking about opening doors, we're thinking about low floors, so there's lots of accessibility, and high ceilings, so there's lots of potential. That we're not closing it in and making it small and tight, that there's lots of opportunities. And then how do we connect, engage, and learn from them and with them over time so that we've created a collaborative partnership where there is that augmented learning as we go? And then what is our shared understanding of the needs and opportunities in each school, making sure that we're using an assets-based approach. So often STEM isn't available to certain communities because we're looking at the test scores. We look at the test scores and there's a deficit mindset saying, well, we don't have time to do STEM type programming because we got to get these test scores up. That's a deficit-minded approach versus an asset-minded approach where we're looking at what are the strengths and opportunities within this community and how can we get there. And the fact is, the research shows that high quality STEM programming means students excel in each of the different silos when they have those integrated opportunities to apply math and science and engineering to solve complex problems. And then making sure that we're looking at how do we, in that coordination, having representative mentorship. Part of that building identity is students having a chance to see themselves as scientists, engineers, mathematicians who can solve complex problems using multiple disciplines. And then who in their communities are already a part of that, or how using the widespread Zoom and technology that you have within your industries to connect students with people who look like them. We use this idea of a group photo. Students need to see themselves in the group photo and see themselves looking good in that group photo. So how do we give kids access to those group photos through real life people who are doing the work? And then how do we engage our mentors over time? And then finally, we need innovative professional learning. Grassroots up isn't a traditional model for our schools, and we see it all the time happening right now, where there is a real repression of what's happening in schools. And so we need to have professional learning that empowers our educators in order to be able to create engaging lessons that also engage the students where they are. And that takes coordination both at a district level, a school level, but then also just one-on-one working with teachers, and how do we engage them in learning opportunities so that they can then apply it to working with their students. I want to have a quick trigger warning here. Education is under attack, as you may know, those of you who are following the CRT red herring that's happening right now. These words are going to get us in trouble, but they're necessary and important. A quick vocabulary lesson, and then I'm going to hand it back over to everyone. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are trigger words right now because they signal that people are possibly engaging in critical race theory. One of the ways to look at this critical race theory, anti-critical race theory, is if we say we're anti-racist, we're racist. If we say that we are against diversity, equity, inclusion, we're racist. But if we bundle all those pieces and put them under the evil critical race theory, then we can say we don't want learning that. And so there's a lot of erasure that's happening in our communities right now. Generative justice is another one that's coming down the pike towards us, where how do we create opportunities for people to build and engage in the world around them so that they're generating and the justice that is needed to it's basically, we tell people pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but we don't give them boots or straps. This is the generative justice is moving towards having those bootstraps. Culturally sustaining pedagogy. If I come in as a white male and teach my lesson without really hearing back, then I'm not culturally sustaining the community that I'm working in. So it's really about how do we engage in pedagogy that sustains the culture that people bring as another part of that identity. And then education debt. We often talk about achievement gap, but really it's about an education debt. We owe a debt to so many communities, and it's our responsibility to step in. And then low floors and high ceilings. This one isn't really so much of a trigger. It's just a way of thinking about how do we increase accessibility and opportunity. Thank you, Ted. I'll stop sharing now.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. That was really great. As we were talking about this, how we're going to frame this, we thought that putting together some definitions and putting together some context around what we're discussing is really important. A lot of folks have asked, yes, there will be a recording of this presentation, which is sometimes better than having just a PowerPoint, because I think Jason did a great job of explaining what he was presenting. And then also we will send around the slides in our follow-up email. And also, that we will include some resources from, from our speakers today to give you a little more insight about their work. I'm going to turn now to one of our, our industry voices, because I think that's, a really important perspective to consider as we think about this. So to Gabriella, you've been championing system-based approaches to advance equity in STEM for a long time, for as long as I've known you. Can you talk about some of the work that you've done in Intel in this space, and how so there's been some things that have worked, some that haven't, but how's this engaged and influenced your approach to supporting STEM education?
Thank you, Ted. I was intently listening to Jason, as again, I think we all continue to learn from each other on some of the things that we're experiencing in the environment. Like you said, I went through STEM education myself. I'm an immigrant, right? I went to high school where there was a lot of bias and racism. I went through college where there was a lot of bias and racism. I joined an industry where there's a lot of bias and racism in many different ways, in intersectional ways. But what I wanted to highlight on some of the things that Jason mentioned is, identity is so important for young people who have not had those role models in their life, who have not ever seen a person of color or of a different identity, cross their path. And I believe seeing people that look like them is important, but it becomes even more powerful when you can overlay that with lived experience and backgrounds. So for instance, me seeing another Latina woman in engineering, that's great. But if she came from a privileged background, our stories are very different. So we have to align on multiple identity elements to really connect with the young people that we're trying to affect. I think that's one way that I think about. I was gonna say, after my experience and joining Intel, and I used to be in engineering, and my passion took me into the STEM space. But my curiosity took me to research, right? And why is this happening? And why haven't we been able to solve this problem? And as Jason mentioned, these are complex problems, because if they were easy, we would have solved them already. So I think my attitude towards what can we do became to stop, or at the very least, disrupt the insanity of doing the same thing over and over and expecting the different results. That's just not going to happen. We need to really start from scratch and figure out how we can work together to solve these complex problems. As I mentioned, typically when I was going through, high school, middle school, and even college, most of the time those opportunities to learn about STEM, engineering, computer science were only available to girls or boys who had demonstrated an interest in these fields or who were recommended by their counselors and teachers. That's like 1% of, the kids in general. What about the other 99%? What about all the girls who don't even know, right, that math can be learned in different ways, that engineering is all about solving problems. So I think focusing on those young people who would not normally, through either a parent or through a teacher or a counselor, kind of following those footsteps, we need to inform them so they have the tools to make better decisions. So again, selecting in school policy who belongs, who doesn't belong, is automatically done year over year in the same fashion. And I think we need to disrupt that. And those are some of the elements that we bring into some of our approaches and blueprints when we create new programs, whether it's at Intel or Intel Foundation. The other thing that I'll say that is incredibly important is to incorporate the families, because a lot of the times, again, let's just say we have an event at X location for STEM and for young people. Well, the people who don't come, it's not because they're not interested or because they don't want to come. Sometimes they have to do, they have to work, or they have to take care of children, or they have to prepare dinner, or they have chores, or they work after school. There's a lot of other obstacles that get in the way. And unless we help to remove some of those challenges and obstacles, we're going to continue to see, again, some of the young people that have a little bit more privilege than others continue to represent these fields. And we're leaving a whole swath of young people with tremendous talent behind. So again, I think everything that Jason said, I was just here going, check, check, check. We're with you on that. And I think we're all learning together. And the last thing I'll say is one of the things that struck me, again, as I've been going through my career, is we work with, many nonprofit organizations, and it kind of became such a competitive environment for funding across many, because the more nonprofit organizations succeeded, the more nonprofit organizations emerged. And so, we were trying to help everybody, and oftentimes the work, as good as it is overlapping or redundant. And so I think the idea of collective impact, which again is not just about collaboration, is the synergies are so much greater that we need to stop thinking about the glory and sort of the corporate identity and brand and reputation alone is not what we're doing this for. We really need to come together and work together, to get these young peoples the help and the educators the help that they need so that they can be successful, so then we can be successful. And I think the more that companies work together, the private, philanthropies, public sector, nonprofit, we come together and we band together to help each other advance our collective objectives and our shared value, I think that we will start to see some difference and some change. If we continue to do the same thing, we're just going to continue to see the same results. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Gabriela. That's a lot of amazing insights into this space. And I think you have definitely put that work into practice. I give a shout out to our partners at STEM Next, who you've partnered with on Million Girls Moonshot, as well as the work you've done with our initiative, Million Women Mentors, to be part of these collaborations that are systems-based. And so thank you very much. Let's turn it to the other industry voice on the panel, to Stephanie. At Northrop Grumman, you have a real global approach, as Intel does as well, but specifically, because this surfaced in our conversation the other day, you mentioned that you look at equity sort of differently as you approach different communities. And I just was wondering, can you talk a little bit about, because I think this is important for especially for folks as they try to engage industry to support their work in this space. How do you evaluate equity as you look at sort of high leverage areas for impact?
Thanks, Ted. And I think it builds on everything that we've already heard from Jason and Gabby. It's about people seeing themselves. It's about them seeing that ceiling and seeing that pathway as something that maybe is going to take some work, but isn't unachievable. And so when I look at little boys, little girls who are going into STEM, who maybe see someone who looks like them or who doesn't, and I think many of us can imagine being in that space where we've not been the majority somewhere, helping them to have that support all the way across the board. And so within the company Northrop Grumman and the Northrop Grumman Foundation, we're really looking at how are we supporting building sustainable communities. And then if we take that and we look at it from a STEM approach, really how are we supporting every single student, regardless of their background, marrying that with employees through volunteerism, and then really making sure that we're listening to what the critical needs are in those communities so that we can be that good corporate partner. Not just here's our money, but what are we actually doing to help make it sustainable? And then we find, Gabby and I think are going to be new friends, and we'll probably wind up working together in many different spaces because there's that passion that exists there. So our equity education goal really is part of our focus. I've been in the company nearly 20 years. It's been around a focus within equity. I'm with Northrop Grumman for longer than that. But in our STEM strategy, we have this education equity goal. And that really helps to focus our giving on making sure that we have our education funding that's dedicated to those who are underrepresented in STEM. This includes Black, Hispanic, Indigenous peoples, female, people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ+, low income, homeless individuals, and their families. And that's a big, broad swath. And I think what I had shared in the group conversation the other day is, if I'm solely looking at just the United States, right, my Indigenous focus might be on a completely different group than my colleagues who were sitting in Australia looking at what does Indigenous mean to them. So there's that focus of making sure that we're being supportive of equity, but going back to Jason, does the shoe fit? Is it the right shoe for the right situation? And so last year, I'm proud to say that $13.6 million, that was 54% of our funding, went to support this goal. And as a company, I've mentioned, we've got this strong heritage and this history of volunteerism and engagement in our communities. And I think that because we marry all that all together and we have this engagement of leveraging and supporting nonprofit partners and the schools that we work with those extra lifts for where their needs are, we're really able to make a strong impact. I think the thing that, as an educator, as someone who's done a lot of schooling, that really helps us to move that bar and make a stronger impact is the workforce relevant education that we do with our teachers, the teacher professional development. We tied that into our UN SDG goal number 4. We succeeded that goal. And now we're doubling down on what we're going to continue to do forward with our next education goal. So last year we reached 324 new teachers, middle school STEM teachers, and in turn helped to inspire nearly 355,000 students. So our teacher PD really works to build that relevancy between what is learned in the classroom and applications in the workplace, building stronger connections between the local educators and the local Northrop Grumman that are in that, and basically in their backyard, and helping to create sustainable teacher cohorts within the communities that we work. I was a middle school and a high school teacher, and I taught math. You can imagine how many times I heard Ms. Fitzsimmons, when am I ever going to need this? When am I going to have to use this? And luckily I had come from industry, went into teaching, I'm back in industry. I was able to tell them why and how, and it gets that excitement there, right? All of a sudden there's a reason for why you're learning how to factor. So I'm calling in from Melbourne, and I just kind of want to put this whole big web of where our interrelationships come in. This happens across the country. It happens in the 6 countries that we have a strong focus in, but I'm here in Florida, so I'm going to use Melbourne as my example. And so teacher professional development, we have the Northrop Grumman Foundation Teachers Academy. It's a year-long process for teachers with our partner NSTA, it's the National Science Teaching Association. These teachers from all these communities that are participating in Northrop Grumman communities come together for an entire year. Most of it's virtual. COVID has made almost all of it virtual. And they're engaging in this teacher professional development, the pedagogy, the connections to the workplace. That entire year culminates with an externship at the Northrop Grumman that's in their backyard, tying it back to when those students are asking, when am I ever going to use this, to their teacher, they can say, well, that engineer or technologist I met who's over there at that building that you drive by does this, and they do these big, awesome things, and you too can do it. And then hopefully we get field trips, COVID pending, right? And continue on. And then we also tie in, so we've got all those teachers, we've been doing it for 6 years. So every single teacher that's been part of that, then they're engaging, but then they go back to their classrooms. So maybe we've got another teacher who's part of our Earth Echo expeditions. That's a teacher PD program focused on environmental sustainability and environmental justice, marrying it with how engineering and technology solve these wicked environmental problems. So teacher A went to the Teachers Academy, teacher B is over in Earth Echo. Now they're hopefully talking and they're merging, but wait, they found their friend who went to Space Academy, which is the space camp for teachers. And that teacher's back and they're super excited about space. And then they ran into another teacher here who's pulling down some of our foundation, our Space Foundation curriculum. And maybe they're talking to the teachers who participated in over in Australia or the UK. And all of a sudden, all of these teachers are engaging and this web is self-sustaining. They're getting excited, they're sharing ideas. Teachers talk to teachers, teachers trust teachers, and they're helping us to build this environment, but then they're also helping to share it. Every single middle school teacher reaches at least 100 kids a year, right? And then they're going to use it and continue to modify it. And so I just think it's an amazing experience. That is how we kind of take all of that together. So that's our foundation programming. So all of our community, I'm Italian and my hands talk with me. All of our sites get a chance to kind of raise their hand and pull from the different programs that we offer across the foundation or the enterprise. But we know how important it is that we're also reaching our communities locally. And so in our core operating communities, they have local charitable funding as well. So they can listen to what's happening in that community. They can meet the teachers and the nonprofits that we're working with for those critical needs and marry that STEM strategy, marry those priorities, leverage those foundation programs to build resources that really help what's needed locally, and not just that we're here and this is your only option. And I think all of that really does help to make an impact in the community, but also to make a stronger impact in the world.
Oh, lots of good stuff. Thank you very much. That was what I expected to hear in terms of thoughtful contributions. So thanks so much, Stephanie and Gabriella, for providing that industry voice and how you're sizing these opportunities up, and also the philosophy you're bringing into them. And I can totally relate as a former educator myself in middle school, French and Spanish, which I used to teach. It's like you need to make it valuable for students and useful, like making sure that speaking in French or Spanish actually helps them do something, and not just thinking about the theoretical explanation and having them master the concept. So Miles, I'm excited to turn to you to get Education Works is a very local organization. I mean, it's in a huge city, but you do a lot of work in Education Works to really help students in that out of school time space so that they can have access to opportunities that complement their learning, expose them to career opportunities, nurture a passion. And you and your team are advancing these and managing these programs. Wondering if you could provide some examples for our audience of some of the things that have really worked for Education Works in Philadelphia in terms of working towards those goals, and some of the challenges, and just some insights around like what really makes a great industry partner for an organization like Education Works.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you to my colleagues here, and I'll try my best not to duplicate or repeat what's already been said. This opportunity with out of school time in particular was very attractive to me as a former principal, because scope and sequence and academia and how we typically think in academic terms is the devil in this conversation. We don't recognize the humanity in people. And we've been successful because we don't take a paternalistic view of how content gets in front of young people. And we trust the process that if our young people actually get exposure, they connect with their passion, and then their minds run wild and opportunity runs wild, right? So that's a very hard thing to do as someone who has participated in the academic conversation for years, because that overcomplication or that complication of how information gets to young people has led us to scope and sequence and saying that we covered content in a record time, but there is no depth of knowledge. There is no depth of knowledge because the kids have not connected and are not passionate about what's in front of them. So out of school time, when leveraged properly, is an opportunity to escape the boundaries set by scope and sequence, the boundaries set by state regulations and expectations for individuals that haven't been in the classroom in 20 years. Then when you add the factor of Black and brown kids and how they're viewed by systems, health institutions, education institutions, we lack the humanity to engage them. So yes, consider the mores and traditions of the community that you serve. At the same time, recognize that our teacher force and educators see Black kids 4 years older than they actually are. So when we talk about inquiry, when a Black kid pushes and they inquire, sometimes that's viewed as resistance. That resistance leads a Black kid into in-school suspension. So before we even talk about how young Black people and brown people see themselves in the classroom, a real conversation needs to be had about how educators see the Black kids and brown kids that are in front of them, because that means everything. So it's not just the content, it is the tool and the use of information and how that gets put in front of a Black and brown kid. All that being said, most institutions only see out of school time for Black and brown kids as a safe place to be. We've taken advantage of that ignorance and we've gone absolutely crazy because they don't have any expectations. The institutions don't. And I'm being very honest here. I'm not pulling any punches. So we take advantage of that very low bar. We are given every opportunity to do what we want as an organization. We grab content from well-resourced communities, from private schools, as a bit of a Robin Hood theory. We steal it, we bring it to those young people and just say, when we present it, here is opportunity. There is no connection to it. There is no test score. There is no expectation that you're going to love it. We want you to try these things out, this portfolio of services, this portfolio of opportunity, and do with it what you please. Because the truth be told, when kids go into private school, there is no such thing as out of school time. It is just the school day. It is the portion of the school day when you just engage content and you do whatever you want with it. So that's you name it, investment club, that's, it could be how you express your intelligence via sports like water polo, you name it, their world is their oyster, right? So when you advance the conversation some 10 years, who's more prepared for our workforce and our entrepreneurial pursuits? A kid that had a well-rounded experience with almost no pressure, or the kid who only gets identified as intelligent if they do well on a standardized test? Welcome to Black and brown communities for the most part. So the way we engage our young people is with inquiry based for certain, but no expectations once we pass it on. It is completely up to you what you do with it. Now, when you go into our 18 to 30 age group, what we have a greater conversation with is, if we're going to put something in front of you STEAM related, how does that connect? What is the connective tissue between that experience and actual career opportunity and possible entrepreneurial pursuits? While that's going on, we recognize food, clothing, and shelter issues. So as a principal, I have a teacher come to me and say, this kid is not focusing in class. What they don't realize is the kid is dealing with all types of things at home. So if you don't have a wellness component and a counseling component, how can a kid work on science, social studies, and math when their concern is food, clothing, and shelter? So I say all this to say, One, we have to be not so paternalistic with information that gets put in front of our young people. We have to honor the inquiry that we're talking about right now and make sure the individuals who are in front of them recognize them as human and at their actual age, and they not be chastised for resistance or what they view as resistance. It's inquiry in a lot of cases. And make sure your partner either is on the same page with you or provide space because they have a very low bar for you to do what you please as an operator. So that combined with everything we just heard from our colleagues makes for a healthy environment for young people to enjoy information without being stigmatized if they don't connect with the information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great, Miles. Yeah. I wanted to say, you following up what you did, like companies, funders in general, I think one of the things that they struggle with in funding STEM is that you don't always just focus on spending your resources on science, technology, engineering, and math if you want outcomes of students in those areas, because there's a lot more in the outcome than just STEM in a student that's successful in STEM.
It certainly is. And I would say to you, you asked me a very specific question around partnership. So as an example, what we just talked about, we're now partnering with the Franklin Institute, and we have for some years here in Philadelphia. And it's a nationally recognized museum of science with a lot of interactive opportunities. But the young people, I'm born and raised in Philadelphia, it's very rare even Black and brown students in walking distance of the Franklin Institute cross the threshold of the Institute. And they're Philadelphia residents. So what we agreed to do was bring content from the Franklin Institute to those communities that have never crossed that threshold. And then the capstone is actually have students from these communities, including Camden, New Jersey, to come in 1,000 at a time during the summer and push into the Franklin Institute. So they come in excited, prepared to engage content and feeling very welcomed. But before we got to that place, before we went into that institute, we engaged those young people on their terms and without expectation.
Thank you. That's great. I'm just looking through the questions that we have here because there's Susan Wheeler and Susan. Is it possible, Susan, are you still on? I think, Susan, I feel like your question is evolved. Is it possible we could get Susan's voice on? So I don't know if Susan wants to talk or. Hey, Susan, would love for you to ask your thank you for joining us. How are you? Wondering if you you've gotten some dialogue in the question group, but I know you well, and I'd love to see, kind of elaborate on your question about how to get industry engaged and see the value, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So my question is, and I really appreciate Stephanie and Dr. Gonzalez participating, because many times when I go to these events, and I see that there's a number of other industry partners that are at this, but almost all, and I'm in Sacramento, almost every meeting I go to on this topic, I'm the only employer at the table. And I've been trying for years, probably 10 years, to get other employers to engage in this. A lot of businesses are focused on immediate bottom line. So, how do we help them see the longer term impact of their involvement? I think we've heard from the panel, educators are on board, but they can't do this alone. They need industry to help make the connection between what youth are learning and how they're going to apply it, to Stephanie's point, when am I ever going to use this, right? We hear that all the time. So I think it's up to industry to step up to the table, but it's almost like you have to do, and I think I mentioned a business case. Why does it make sense for them to invest not just dollars, but the time to get involved and make the difference? Because educators are trying to do their best, but I think we need industry there as well. So how do we help industry see that they are essential to this equation?
Awesome. Thank you, Susan.
I was just going to say something to it. Obviously, those of us who are on the panel are right there with you, Susan. We do believe that industry plays a key role, and we have to be held accountable. to help our communities, to help our educators, and put us to the test. So I, for one, would like to touch base with you offline, but certainly, the way, I think personally, the way to make the case is to show results, to show impact, and to try to do things in a unique, different way that will yield the results that we're seeking. So again, short answer to, I think, what deserves a much longer one, but happy to connect with you offline.
And there's a great, Intel's located, got a facility right near Sacramento, so that might be a good connection. I do see in the audience, Jackie Berry from 3M, they have a funders network that Jackie and I were actually talking about yesterday, and really do talk about some of these issues, and how they can be a part. And I think of advancing a system, and 3M has been another one of those companies in that list that I was saying has really been advocating for systemic reform in education. So that might be a place to look. And also backbone organizations like the state networks. Not all states are the same, but can be really useful. I know California is a giant space, but I know Jeff Weld in Iowa, who many of the folks here know, and Tammy Getz in Utah, just a couple of names that pop to mind of folks that have been really focused on engaging industries sustainably at the state level. So there's that. I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts on Susan's question.
I've just got a couple to add, because I think all of that is important, right? It's half of us as industry dropping our ego to do what's right for the community. But whether you go all the way up to the national level or you come down to what's happening in your hometown, there are consortiums of teams of industry and nonprofits and schools who are looking to connect. And sometimes it's just a few of you starting and really pushing up your sleeves, and then people want to join because they're seeing the impact. So, Susan, if it's just you right now, right? Eventually people will join. I forget what movie it was, right? Build it and they will come. I think that's that's the hardest part, right? Getting it started.
Yes, Field of Dreams, Ray Kinsella. Miles and Jason, I wonder if you just had any thoughts. I know, Jason, you'd engaged in the dialogue and on the chat and the Q&A dialogue. I don't know if either of you had any thoughts for Susan.
Well, my suggestions were too small scale for where Susan was going, so I think it's probably out of my lane to address some of the bigger industry components. It would just be nice to see that as being a standard, as seeing a pipeline for down the road. How do the ways that we solve complex problems is through the coordination of disparate groups. So there is a long-term interest, when you think about, organizations that try to build endowments or try to build in safety nets for the future, making the argument that investing in today's youth is investing in tomorrow, and provides stability for the future of our organizations and companies and industries, to be able to solve these complex problems, especially knowing what we know about what the future is looking like.
And related to that, a lot of times when you're in an education space or a so-called nonprofit space, we tend to completely lead with our heart when we're having debate and banter. The one thing that we've been successful at in partnership and getting people to move is coming to the table with an asset and recognizing that this conversation is about an exchange of assets. As an example, we are creating an app very shortly, what we're going to call the Opportunity app. That recognizes how expensive it is for young people to engage in institutions that we currently have. What's the return on investment? And then you have people with master's degrees that are baristas at this point, right? So how can a young kid who's born into in a deficit position financially make that type of investment and come out clean? So the idea is like to build this app that connects them to real opportunity through virtual badging, certifications, things of that nature, because that really is the future. I say all that to say, one of the lines that we're going to push in on is the insurance industry. And what we found out via a white paper to someone who's very close to our organization is that the insurance industry has a dearth of talent in Q. And you're going to have maybe 300, 400,000 positions not being able to be filled. There's one space that they have never ventured into, and that's the Black community, to fill those positions. So the conversation with national insurance organizations to grab some information from them to build out this content is to say, your industry is dying, and guess who I have access to, right? So maybe the play here, again, this is a handshake with what Jason just shared, is that we have to stop coming into these conversations relying on a heart conversation, because not everybody leads with their heart. And we have to come to the negotiation table with asset and an opportunity to exchange.
Yeah, and Ted, if I can say one last thing, you know, the Million Girls Moonshot is a social experiment. Again, it's not a program, it's not an initiative. We're trying to build a movement around supporting girls in STEM and bringing everyone to the table, everyone to advocate for, everyone to support and fund across, at least for now, all 50 states. So again, that, you know, showing cases where collaboration and collective impact in bringing everybody together to the table with an asset. That's one way that we can work together. But if everybody's kind of working on their own or in pockets, it's going to be much harder to lift and sustain. So if anybody is interested in that, again, the website has information, and we just completed our first year of impact. We just launched in, what was it, September 2020. And as of today, the results are impressive through this collective approach. So again, this is not to boast anyone's reputation, but it's really the collective impact, which again, to your point, STEM Next is helping to coordinate as the backbone organization. So that might be an idea to solve some of these complex problems that we're trying to address.
Awesome. Yeah, they are. And there's a lot of complex problems. And one question that I think a big, Susan in Sacramento, I've been, we work with UC Davis, and which is just outside, for those of you who don't know, just outside of Sacramento. And, Sacramento doesn't have, the big, they have branches of big companies, but they don't have that many. SMUD is the utility company there, but they don't have that big presence other than the state government of California. But we all know that government can be challenging as a partner. And if you're trying to get industry involved, there's a lot of medium and small sized businesses in a city like Sacramento. I don't think they're alone. Well, if you're, Northrop, Intel, have a lot of experience. Verizon, I've seen on the call, 3M, a lot of our partners, UL, been in that space. Is there, as sort of in the last couple of minutes, is there something you could say as you're trying to get, what's something even, from Jason and Miles, like at a very local level, how could a small or medium-sized business get engaged in supporting students and being really helpful to supporting STEM learning in a way that's not going to cost them a ton of money or time, but is going to help them make a big impact?
That's a really good question. That sort of goes back to this idea of exposure. So what it would mean for a young person, it's our firm belief as an organization that brilliant people and people who are passionate about things become incredibly successful. The odds go up tremendously. When you engage those individuals in a conversation and you talk about what was that turning point, what was the moment, they almost never refer to a text. They say, I met somebody, I had a conversation with somebody, I walked into something. It's those types of things. And again, as educators and people in academia, we would like to say it was a textbook. It was, this reading, right? This white paper. It's not that. More times than not, the people who are highly successful on our planet actually dropped out of school because they were being bored to death, right? So more than anything, it's about the exposure. So to have a group of young people come in and experience what you experience on a regular basis is life altering, is potentially game changing. Just watching young people walk into like the Barnes Museum. We have a relationship with the Barnes Museum. And we had a couple of conversations with young people before they went to the Barnes Museum in their school. When they walked in the Barnes Museum, it all made sense. And then they started to recognize, and we're talking about second and third graders, they started to say, wow, there's a whole set of careers here. I don't have to be an artist. I can be a curator. It did not come home to them until they walked in and had an experience. It was not the text. So I would just say to employers, people who want to be engaged, if you don't want to put money into something, time in the long run cost you nothing for a group of kids to walk in and see what you do or experience what you do. So I just would like to share that we've had some really positive outcomes based on that alone.
And the architect too at the Barnes, right? Geez, that's a beautiful building. I'm afraid we are out of time. And I do want to be mindful of keeping this and the constraints of what we set out to do. So thank you to our panel very much. And also I want to give a shout out to my colleagues and also the colleagues of our speakers who helped bring this all together, help us market this to this amazing audience that we pretty much over 100 participants, which is in this day and age is never easy to get over 100 people on a Zoom anymore. So that means you guys were doing a great job on the panel. So thank you very much. We will send a follow-up email probably next week, I'm thinking. So look for that, and let's just keep this conversation going.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ted and panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.